and irony, just like animal farm. Justice mean inequity, so who go say the truth? Who go say the truth? Christian can say silence, Islamic leaders silence, kings and queens silence, traditional leaders silence. So who go say the truth? We are the workers of comfort call. Now by area, why no better? We are the workers of comfort call. One guy's out here, why no better? Who go say the truth? Who go say the truth? Oh, he need it now, see what I see so. Now your friend on a nine come at them. Only papi obeka na sembia. So I want one over to it. Everybody was afraid. And when Tina to my cottage again, once my boy dumping one and but who go tell the truth? Nanai or say me. Nanso bien person beka wansam because everybody is afraid. Anya safwe muayini. Akukudro for nyina dalima. Who go say the truth? Obiadra konson so to grow Germansa to me be a cacobrafo. Efo anyina ye. Efo. When you know ye. Na so kutrata down na so be dia back or why no keke. I fene for be man mo pia for efo e. Ne cross on my mo. Anya safwe mo ayini. Akukudro for nyina dalima. And who go say the truth? Abaya di bote chino. Yedi bi bebo nyande bi. Kachi se udi oma upipi numa. Would your mind never shine my preference? But who go tell the truth? TUC, silence. Even journalists, silence. Oh, then who go say the truth? Right is right. Wrong is wrong, no matter how you justify. You say you wanna get rid of corruption. Someone want to help you, now the person become your target. Jobless no they mean senseless. Poverty no they mean useless. One day them go resist.
A very good evening to you wherever you are. Once again, it's a pleasure to welcome you to MyView, coming to you live on Today's Ghana News TV. As usual, it's my pleasure to welcome you to the show where we share our views on pertinent issues. Wherever you are is an opportunity that you subscribe to our network, subscribe to all our media handles, so that you be part and parcel of this evening's discussion. And there has been a lot of talk as to that the youth are the future. Is that your view? I do not think so. I believe that the youth is not the future, but the present. And therefore, we want to look at the importance of the youth in leadership positions. If we want to empower tomorrow, then we must have the youth leading today. Do you share in the same opinion? Do you have that opinion? Do you have the same view? As usual, I have very important guests this evening who will be doing justice to this particular topic. But we will take a short break, and when I come back, I will introduce the guest to you, And for those who have just joined, do well to share the link so that many more people would join us and then share their views as well on this program. Once again, a very good evening to you and welcome to the show. Stay tuned. So, welcome once again. The importance of the youth in leadership positions. This is a topic we want to look at this evening, considering where we are as a country, Ghana, and where we stand in terms of our leadership. I do not want to say leadership crisis, but this evening I'm very privileged to have two eminent people to share ideas on this particular topic. It is a pleasure to welcome on the show Professor Sylvia Bauer. Professor Sylvia Bauer is an associate professor of sociology of York University in Canada. We are very privileged to have you, Professor Bauer.
Thank you so much, Jerome, for inviting me to what promises to be an exciting discussion.
Definitely. I know my viewers are more excited because it has been a special request, and gratefully we have you on the show.
Thanks.
Yeah. And together again, we have Ambassador Ben Kwam, who happens to be with the Maxwell Stroke Equipped Leadership Ghana Country Coordinator. Ambassador, you are most welcome to the show.
Hi, Prof. Hi, Jerome. Nice to have you here. Thank you. Greetings to everyone listening all over the world. Thank you.
Wonderful. So this evening, wherever you are, this is MyView show coming to you live on today's GhanaNews TV. And we want to look at the importance of leadership, youth in leadership positions, and particularly in our very beloved country, Ghana, and Africa as a whole. So wherever you are, stay tuned and stay glued to your seat. And as usual, it is going to be a very educative and exciting evening. So now we have our guest on the show, and I will briefly just start with Professor Bauer, and then we see how we look at it, because she's a seasoned sociologist, so probably from the sociology point of view, Professor Bauer, why do you think that it is important to have the youth in our leadership positions, from your perspective?
Well, that's a good question to start with, but that's also an obvious one to answer. In the first place, you have the fact that Africa is a very young continent, one of the youngest continents, if not the youngest continent. We have, according to the UN, about 70% of our population currently is actually under the age of 30. So that tells us that we have a very young and vibrant population, as it were. We also have a situation where you have the people who are seeking opportunities to build the country or build their countries all over the continent. And they have the energy, they have the resources, and they have the imagination to push our continent forward. And therefore, to not have youth represented in leadership positions is a missed opportunity in terms of our progress and in terms of our transformation. The other thing that is important to add in this particular situation is that when we are talking about democracy and we are talking about representation, it's important to have all the sectors of the population fairly represented in leadership. And so, based on the statistic that I've just given you, it should tell us that if you have the majority of the people who are actually under the age of 30 in our continent, that tells us that we do indeed need to move forward in terms of empowering the youth. The other thing that is important to note, and I'll probably conclude on this matter and wait for further discussion, is that we have research that shows that despite the fact that the young people, in addition to older generations, are all pro-democracy or interested in keeping a democracy in the continent, you also have increasingly young people on the continent being a little bit more open to military intervention because of the dissatisfaction they have seen in terms of governance. Now, that is a very dangerous sort of thing to be considering around this time, because it also tells us that people are getting fed up in terms of what they are not seeing represented in terms of the leadership structure of the continent. And also, I said I was going to end on this note, but I'll just pick up on the point that you made in terms of the fact that we've been talking about the future, when the future is now, and especially because we are now faced with multiple crises, not least being the climate crisis, which is one of the biggest things that youth of today have to actually address, because that is going to impact their life's chances, the quality of life that they are going to have, something that older generations to a large extent did not have to deal with, or at least let's say that the level of the crisis that young people today have to deal with in the future is not the type that any other generation has had to deal with. So these are some of the reasons it's really important to have youth in leadership positions across our continent.
That's great. You said something. I was just thinking about what happened or what is happening at our next door neighbor, Burkina Faso. Because if you look at the leader there now, is a very young person,
Yes.
and because he never got the expectations from the people who were ruling, he had to find his way out, and then he's up there and he's making a difference. But that brings me to find out societal structures or norms. Don't they influence the acceptance of these young people in our leadership positions?
Very good question, and very good sociological point to note as well, not surprisingly. Of course, I think for a very long time, there's been this understanding or notion that young people should follow the leaders or follow the visions of their elders in any particular society, and particularly in our case. Our culture tells us that older people are wiser and older people know because of experience what it is that works. However, I think that part of that narrative has also missed the fact that we've always had older people, elders, who've guided actions of younger, more vibrant leaders throughout our histories. In a lot of African societies, there's been great migrations. People have moved all over because of reasons, including famine. If we go back a little further, people have moved or moved away or migrated to seek refuge from slave raiders. And we all have examples, or many of us have examples listening to our grandparents about some of those stories. Now, if you hear those stories, you would hardly hear that the leaders of the people who moved the people from one place to the other were old people. They were guided, right? That's the other thing we have to think about, is that a lot of these young people were guided. They listened to their elders, they heard the stories, they understood their histories, they understood why things had been the way that they were. But it's important for us to also realize that culture, life, humans are dynamic people. We've never been static in terms of the way that we've thought. And one of the other things that we don't really talk about on the continent is that we are probably one of the most dynamic group of people in the world. Why do I say that? We are the oldest humans on Earth, right? All life, as we know it, started on the continent. So we've had to change a lot. Our norms, the way that we've thought about things have always had to change. And so this idea that when young people are leading, it kind of means that there's no older person at home or there's no other more experienced person at home is really a bit of a fallacy. Right? We have the fact that, when you are growing up, you are already almost immediately taught how to be an older person. I remember as old as 6 being told, you are growing up, you're growing up. Very soon you will have to do these things for yourself. And for many of us, our experiences growing up actually tells us a very different story, that we were allowed to lead in various things. If you were taught how to herd the goats, when to take them out, where to go and fetch water, how to sweep the compound. No one got up in the morning and, sort of asked you to do it, right? You led in that very small area of responsibility that you were given. That was your task. And if anything went wrong, then you had, you had a repercussion. So I think many of us actually grew up with this, but without necessarily understanding that we were being guided by the elders, and that we were leading in a lot of ways. And even when, decisions were to be made, they explained these decisions for us, or explained them to us in a way that made us understand why they had to take those kinds of decisions. So if we come back to the idea that, in Africa, the leadership structure is such that we respect our elders, that is true. And I don't think being in leadership means that you do not listen to advice. On the contrary, in actual fact, that is the time you listen to experience, you learn as much as you can. And I've found all throughout that, when you are leading in any particular thing, you understand very quickly how important it is to place people in very strategic positions. But I don't think that those norms preclude us or preclude young people from leading in any place. What it does is that it tells us that we must never look down on experiences of our elders, of people who've gone through life stages in a way that will guide us in our own future. There is a saying, and I'll end there, that what an older person sees sitting down, a young person would have to climb the top of the mountain and may still not be able to see that. So, it's important for us to recognize the strengths of the different groups of people we have in our population structure in order to move ourselves forward.
Wow. You couldn't have said it any better, Prof. We'll see. We'll take the view from Ambassador Kam, and when we come back, we'll look at other issues. So our program this evening, we're looking at the importance of the youth in leadership positions. And Ambassador Kam happened to be the country director of a leadership program. And what does your program really entail, if I may ask briefly?
Hey, thank you so much, Jerome. Am I audible?
Yeah, very.
All right. So the Maxwell Leadership Program is all about capacity building. It's all about helping leaders to lead with value propositions. And it's a global program that is running throughout all the continents of Africa and the other continents also. In Africa, it's running in about 26 countries, and Ghana is a part of it. And to just tell you, within the space of 4 years, we've been able to impact about 2 million and counting leaders. And we're doing our best to make the best of the impact that we want to see in Africa and also in the world. Yeah.
So what's your target? Are you targeting the youth, or you're just targeting people in leadership positions?
Well, if you talk about the youth, I think that's a very good question. But youth is the center of all that we are doing. But most importantly, our focus is on people who are already in leadership positions and how we could connect and help them to lead better. Then again, people who are aspiring and hoping to be there. These are the two major falcon, but we operate within the 8 streams of influence, and that is got to do with the government, the legal space, the health industry, the sports, the media, coming all the way to the religious faction, so on and so forth. So it cuts across all these major factions, and the youth is at the center of it all.
So, from your experience, why do you think that the youth leadership is important in today's world? From your
Well,
experience.
yeah. I just want to build on what Professor rightly said. You know, we talk about youth, we can do a synonym or a synonymous words like, if you talk about youth, we are talking about change. If you talk about youth, we are talking about progress. If you talk about youth, we're talking about energy. We're talking about future. All right. So, because I remember I was walking through one of the hospitals in Ghana, and I saw a writing which really sunk really deep. And it says that if he said the young people are the letters we send to the future we cannot feature. So the young people are letters we send to the future that we may never see. So if we are talking about the young person or the youth, we are looking at people that could carry on whatever legacy that we are building today. If a bad legacy, we can definitely be sure that there's going to be a bad one in the future. And if it's a good one, definitely we can see the paintings on the wall. So when leaders are beginning to speak right now, talking about good future, great happenings tomorrow, so on and so forth, every intellectual person who understands leadership spectrum will begin to consider the young person. What is the state of the young person in the country? What is going on with these young people? Then we can make a projection of what tomorrow looks like. And that is why it's very central and key. If we ever love our country and ever love whatever we are building today, then we must put the young person at the center of it all. Yeah.
Wow. You know, Prof made a statement. We're looking at the societal structure and all that.
Yeah.
From your experience, what are the challenges or what challenges do young leaders often face when they are trying to enter into leadership positions?
Yeah, definitely. We have what we call a lot of bottlenecks, especially within our socio-cultural context giving. And I want to skew it only to the Ghanaian context, even though I have quite an idea of what is happening with the African thing. The beautiful thing about Africa is, yeah, there are so many countries within the continent, but you could see that tradition is at the background of it all. And one of it has to do with the superiority of the older guys as against the young, right? That's why when it comes to even sharing food within a social construct, the elderly person must eat before the young person. But we know that the young person is really fragile and needs a lot of strength even than the old ones. And that's at the words go is where we get it wrong, right? We see it as more of like a respect kind of thing rather than should I say, priority. One of the things, Jerome, we are teaching and we are talking about is priorities, right? We need to really stamp our foot on what is really important and needed and not trying to, bulldoze our way through trying to put some kind of structures and all of that. So as Prof. Riley said, one of the major bottlenecks has to do with this social cultural establishment, which is visibly spelled out in every organization. Okay, so we see a lot of people having great ideas, great energy, great progress, and it seems like they exercising these rights rather paints a picture of pride, which is not close enough. It is more of they being guided and they being mentored to channel their energy in the right way. But I see it more of an issue of insecurity. You remember the resurgence of the rise of technology where those using the typewriters had to move away for those using the other computer stuff. You saw the kind of confusion that was really coming up. So I see it more of that, like insecurity on the part of our leaders. And any leader that is insecure about their position really is not a leader because they are not really, spelling out the whole idea of leadership. So that's one bit of it. Then number two also has to do with the idea that, and I just want to say this in passing real quick, it's more like a joke, but it has to do with three professors within the three main universities in Ghana, talking about the Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology, University of Ghana, and Cape Coast, where these professors had come together to come and check the work of 3 very genius young Ghanaians who had put together an aircraft. And I wanted to go test if this thing is going to be a great idea or not. The Legon lecturer student said, well, I don't think I'm going to even stay in this, how do we call it, airplane at all. Then they spoke to the science and technology guy. He comes out with a very funny stuff and said, well, I'm not also going to come at all. UCC says, well, don't even think of it. Then they asked them, why is this so? Then all these guys unanimously said, we know what we taught these guys, and they're never going to be able to pull up this aircraft. And even if they're able to pull up this aircraft, it's never going to fly because we know what we taught them. You see, the point is this. The leaders that we have in Africa know clearly how they have built the system. And the system literally weaves out certain class of mindset. So the young guys that are coming with new ideas and new things definitely are by default opposed and weaved out. And that alone is a high demotivating factor for them to even look at it. Prof talked about the fact that the picture that have also been painted in leadership in Africa is not something that is really interesting for them. So they are not even looking at doing it. And these are things that really is impacting our leadership diversity in the country of Ghana.
Yeah, that is the scenario you just painted looks really interesting to me. So it means that there are some misconceptions about the youth in leadership. Definitely.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So let's see. From your experience, as once again, we are very privileged that we have people who are very experienced on the ground. So we are learning more from your experience as we go along with our discussion. Because looking at it, how does the youth benefit organizations and communities? Youth leadership. How does it benefit organizations and communities?
Right. Let me just quickly add this to say that, Jerome, there are a lot of ships that are going all over the sea of the world. Relationship, fellowship, mentorship, and all the ships that you want to talk about. But leadership is the bigger ship in which all these ships begin to make meaning. Leadership plays a central role in direction, in meaning, and in results. When we begin to fail in leadership, every other thing begins to fail. That is why our founder, Dr. John C. Maxwell, says that everything rises and falls on leadership. Communities, institutions, and individuals are going to really enjoy meaningful lives when leadership begins to take the right turn and direction. And most importantly, when we are intentional, and I want to talk about this, you see, there's a huge gap between the older generation and the younger one. And especially in contemporary of our time, we are seeing a toss within what we call between the generations, and most of them falls within the generation Z and the generation Alpha. Maybe let's even talk about the millennials. These are the people that literally, they number up all the kind of 70% of young people in Africa or maybe in the world. This calls for a pragmatic and an intentional transition of power, especially from the young people. The challenge that we are seeing as an organization, especially in African leadership, has to do with the gap that is created between leaders within the older generation and people who want to become leaders. And the thing that has to do with mentorship and coaching that is being watered down within our space of learning is where the whole situation even sits. So when young people begins to lead under mentorship and under intentional coaching, trust me, they will be able to fly and do even more than these older people, to be honest with you, because they are filled with energy, they are filled with talent, They are filled with foresight and they are filled with a lot of progress. The advantage of the older guys are experience and maybe resources. They have the resource, they have the experience, and maybe they have what we call the leverages. But when it comes to what we call speed, energy, progress, creativity, innovation, it lies with the young people. So why don't we channel these resources and experience in being intentional in mentoring these people that are full of energy and really put it in the right direction? Trust me, a lot of things are going to go well.
Wow.
And this
That
is
is
what is
wonderful.
really going to help us for this. So, I mean, we really, really need to have this conversation more and more. And that is why when I saw it, even though I was really constrained with time, trust me, I said, no, I need to really come and really talk about this. And thank you so much for opening your door for this to happen. And I hope we'll do it more and more. Thank you, Jerome.
We would definitely, because we believe that the youth is not the future or whatever it is. It is the present.
It is
So we
now.
must speak it from now. You
It's
miss
now.
it from now, then they will not. They will not be useful tomorrow. So
Absolutely.
we take a little rest, and let me find out from Professor Bauer. We're talking about transition of power. We're looking at if traditional power dynamics really do affect the inclusion of the youth in leadership.
Well,
Very-
that's an important point. But these days, when people use the term tradition and traditional, I'm also very curious about what and which traditions and what traditional things you're talking about. Because a lot of what we have come to be calling our culture is actually sometimes very questionable, right?
Yeah.
Again, things have changed, and over time, things become very institutionalized, and people just say, this is the way it's being done. However, there are times that people can also question these sorts of things. So, for instance, the youth ambassador, and I'll call him the youth ambassador for the purposes of this show, said that, sometimes even in terms of our culture, older people eat first. And that's not something that I'm familiar with from how I grew up, right? The idea was that you fed the youngest, the smallest, people first. The people who were most vulnerable would get the food first, and that mostly that my father would eat last, or when he was going to eat, he would ask anyway whether everyone had had food in the house to eat before he would get his own food. So, but over time, we are seeing some of these shifts and things that are changing, and we are beginning to say that this is how things have been done. The other thing we also want to be mindful of is that some of these practices that we are seeing, where it's increasingly getting harder and harder for older established people to yield the space, that some of those things are also a global phenomenon, right? That we just don't have these problems only on our continent. And in fact, sometimes, you may have young leaders in place, but the structures, the socioeconomic structures, the power structures that are actually moving the economy or moving or guiding decision making belong to a subset of people with resources. So I'm glad that the ambassador, mentioned resources, because that's the other thing that we don't talk enough about. Power is something, we've all heard the saying, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts, absolutely. But it is also important for people to realize that power is not something that is sometimes willingly given or ceded. People have to take power, right, from certain corteses. And there are different ways in which people do this. There are different ways in which people ease themselves into these kinds of leadership positions and all of that. And of course, I applaud the idea of mentorship. But there are times when I also wonder whether we put too fine of a point on mentorship and what that actually means. We have to look again at our education system. What level of civic engagement is actually taught in our school systems? Right from primary school to JSS, what do people know and understand about their history and about their culture? Right? Enough for them to actually feel like they know enough to want to demand more. How much do people, say, in Upper West know about the kinds of resources they have in their region compared to, say, Northern Ghana, or compared to the Ashanti region and all of that? how much do people know about the resources we have in the country of Ghana, for instance, as an example, something that is a shared national resource. So if you don't know a lot of these things in the first place, you don't even know where to start. You want to be a leader doing what exactly? What is the state of the world? However, I think the important thing here to note, and one of the things that is a difference between this generation, or younger generations and older generations, is that the younger generation is a lot more connected globally to struggles that are happening all around the world, struggles that are happening on the African continent as well as around the world. Some of them actually are, part of networks, activist networks globally, even though they may not always be in their small parts of the world. So that connection and information flow is really important in terms of how that shapes the sorts of leaders and the young generation of leaders that we are going to get, because more and more people are becoming more and more aware of what is happening around the world. But then, of course, we come back again to the issue of resources. Who has what resources? Who is able to, for instance, even listen to this particular show at this particular point in time, depending on where they find themselves, right? Because internet isn't cheap. And for you to have internet, you probably would have to have employment or have someone that sponsors this, this resource for you. So there are all of these little things that I think that we have to take into account. For instance, we have to be able to challenge the patronage system, which is really, really problematic. We have to be able to educate our young people to understand that holding their leaders accountable is not disrespectful. In fact, that is what they are expected to do, because we've entrusted these people who are our leaders with our future, and our future is, important. If you take the idea of Tindambas, in, say, the northern part of Ghana, where we talk about Tindambas and landowners, or in fact, the way we talk about land, we talk about the fact that land is not for the present, that it is for the yet unborn. And that so those of us who are holding on to land today, especially when you are at Tindana, you are supposed to be a custodian.
Yeah.
So for me, leaders are supposed to be able to do that. They are supposed to hold this country together, or hold the continent together, for the children that are yet to be born, not even the ones that are alive today, right? At the moment, and that's why I'm glad that you are saying that the future is now. So we have to be able to hold that space. You just don't, destroy all of our resources. We don't waste all of our resources today. We have to be able to think about 20 years from now, 50 years from now. Would we have water? Would we have farming places for our young people? What kinds of spaces are we creating for them? If we were thinking about this, we would not have a situation today where we have this massive unemployment among the young people of our continent. We would not have a situation where people are trying very dangerously to cross the Sahara to reach Europe, when in fact Europe relies on Africa for its wealth, right? So all of these things, for me, are things that we need to teach. Those are the things that make people want to lead. Those are the things that make people want to ask questions. So I'm just hoping that that's part of some of the things that you do in this show, but that generally we all take this up as something that is important. When the minister is giving you money, know that you paid him that money, and the money that he's giving you isn't out of charity, right? That we have to be able to know those things, and be able to hold our leaders accountable. And I think that that's probably one of the most important things young people can actually do today, is to hold them to account.
I think we have to do a lot of advocacy on this area, because the politicians have taken advantage of the poor youth in the country, pay them peanuts, and let them do a lot of destructive work for them, and afterwards they forget about them. The next 4 years they reappear.
Yeah.
But let's look at how the media plays its role as well. From where you sit, I mean, we all heard about, in Ghana, for instance, we heard about babies with sharp teeth. I think it started with Rawlings' era, it moved to Professor Attabills and blah, 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 blah. Mm-hmm. So how does the media play or portray our young leaders' influence in public perception?
Mm-hmm. That's a very good point to raise in terms of young people in media, and especially sometimes the manner in which people try to hold others accountable. And in this case, there are times when I'm also very careful about whether I would describe some of those activities as leadership things, right? Like some of those things are not things that we want to encourage, because we want to have a space where you can have respectful conversations about what is happening in the world, or what is happening in your country, without resorting to the personalized insults, without resorting to the kinds of things that do not, in fact, promote civil discourse. And that's something that is very important. And so it's been the idea somehow that for a while now, that for young people to be able to rise to leadership positions, in some cases, that they then have to show themselves as being, if you would pardon me, very uncivilized in their discourse, right, towards the older generation. And there's a difference. There's a difference between holding people to account and just going after people and, resorting to these kinds of insults. And of course, when that happens, I mean, the people who have power will close ranks, right? And sometimes, even when we are talking about people who have power, it's also important for us to know that we are not just talking about older people, we are also talking about political elite, right, who may be backing a certain older person because their interests are served. Because when we talk about young people in our country or on the continent, we have a lot of young entrepreneurs. We have a lot of young business people who are making big money on the continent. But some of these people, in fact, support some of these, politicians who are not doing enough for the masses of the people. So it's also important for us in talking about, the redistribution of property, of our resources, to understand that we have these class differences as well. And these class differences are diverse, right? You have young people, old people, and all of that. So what is also important for me in terms of talking about leadership is that we also talk about diversity, because talking about young people in leadership means diversity. And for a while, and I don't also necessarily, in using some of these terms to say that I do not subscribe to to the insults that are sometimes generated. But I sometimes also do not blame young people when they get to that stage sometimes where people feel like that's the only way people will listen, right? And the other thing is that we've also, while I've said this, I'm also now reflecting even on this particular point, that's been one of the ways to silence people, right? To silence young people. The moment you say something, they're like, oh, get away, you're being disrespectful. How dare you talk to me like this? And the only way you can then talk to them is to seek permission to talk to them. And we have to break through some of those things. So you see, I've done two things in one space. I've said, well, it's not the way to go, but when it becomes necessary, then you can say, no, you are not actually, an elder that we should listen to. And we also always have to remember a few things. Again, we can borrow a lot of positive things from our culture. For instance, we know that not everyone who dies, even when they die as old people, become ancestors, or the kinds of ancestors that we revere, right? The idea is that if you don't live a good life when you die, no one thinks that you should be considered important anywhere you go. And it's also important for us to understand, as someone once said somewhere, foolish people also grow old, right? And the fact that, they grow old, it doesn't always mean that people become wiser by the time they get older, right? So you have all of these kinds of dynamics that are in place. If there is no avenue for people to express themselves, it may end up degenerating into some of the kinds of situations we have. But it's also important for people to not be fickle in terms of taking criticisms, because there's a lot of criticism, of course, that is unpalatable. And there are times when we have to call a spade a spade. So if we were to call, a certain leader a thief, that's not an insult, right? If they've stolen, in fact, that's not an insult. And perhaps we need to be a little sharper. To go back to your initial thing of babies with sharp teeth, is to say, but you stole this. This wasn't yours to steal, but you stole it. Take the example of how we treat people who steal goods, things of very little consequence. Look at the embarrassment that they have to endure. So if we can call those people thieves, Why can't we call other people who steal our national resources thieves? Right? That doesn't necessarily mean that these are, the sharp teeth type of, we all have to insult, all have to, engage in a shouting match. But I think that we have to find a way to say these things without recourse to insults. There are lots of ways in which you can draw people's attention to things. In fact, there are very, very demure ways, if I may, demure ways to insult people using proverbs, as it were. And sometimes maybe it's the softening of the blow, maybe that allows people to hear, and then that can. But then, of course, again, I say all of this, and when we look at the kinds of various revolutions or attempts at revolutions that have happened with young people across the continent. Kenya's success, the latest one where they were actually able to stop that bill from going through, was fantastic. We saw End SARS in Nigeria. Didn't go as far. We've seen Fix It Ghana, or Fix the Country Ghana, protests from various places in Niger, in Mali, and some of these other places. And let's not forget, further north in Egypt, where the Arab Spring also took down some of the longest serving political leaders in the world, and all of those things that have happened around the world. So there are lots of these things that are happening that tells us that young people feel stifled, right? And so when you talk about the media, it's important for us, and the media is a space that allows us to speak. And of course, now we've moved away from traditional media houses. I mean, we are having this particular conversation. We don't need to go through GBC and all of that, where we are told you can't say this, you can't quite criticize this person. These days, young people have their phones. If you have a little internet, you have TikTok, and you can say anything you want to say. You garner a following, and people are listening. So even when we talk about, the media not doing what it needs to do, or maybe that space itself becomes a little contaminated, so to speak, the question we should ask is, why did we get here? How did we get here? How did it become a case that people need to speak in a particular way to be heard? Because sometimes when people are speaking in very civil tones, no one listens, right? No one listens to the person that is saying things very gently, until someone then says something that shocks our imagination or shocks us, and we are all now suddenly talking about it. Although sometimes then the media, instead of staying with the issues, of course, but then these are media houses that also need to sell their wares, if I may put it that way, right? They need to sensationalize things here and there. There's a whole discussion we can have about whether or not our media reporting is sensitive, insensitive, sensationalist, educative, and the rest of it. But I think for me, it's always, you listen, there's a lot of noise, but what is the matter, right? What is the matter? It's like when you hear a baby crying, a baby can cry and all of that. But until you get to the cause, the root cause of why that baby is crying, no amount of consoling, hugging will stop that baby from crying. So why did the baby cry? Right? So those kinds of things for me are always very important, that we have to hear, we have to listen to what is being said.
I think we'll have to reschedule another opportunity for only the media aspects, and then we'll look at many more things on that issue. So we'll take a short break to take the views from our followers, and when we come back, we'll look at other issues. This is MyView show coming to you live on today's Ghana News TV, and it's a privilege that we have Professor Sylvia Bauer and Ambassador Ben Kwang, who are sharing their ideas and views on the importance of youth in leadership. So wherever you are, it's our pleasure that you are part of this show. So I want to take the views from our followers, starting with Frimpong Befi. Frimpong says, good evening, watching from Akusenia, Somonia. This evening, you have assembled an enviable and knowledgeable youth from Ghana. Good show. We're grateful. Esinam Tamaklo says, insightful topic. We are grateful. Jaframa TV, oh, very grateful that you are carrying our feet as well. This is a very smart and articulating youth on your show. watching from Ravra in the Oti region. Kwekuyebu says Ghana is really blessed with quality human resources. Ghana and Africa indeed have a bright future, watching from Suhum in the eastern region. Wonderful, Kweku. Maybe says watching from Lisbon, Portugal. I'm very excited watching the show this evening. Professor Bauer is an inspiration to my daughters. She should come more frequently on the show. International Women's Day. Well, we'll target her for International Women's Day, and then we see. We keep Ghana beyond success. Worth listening. Oh, we are grateful that you are following Ambassador as well. NDC Diaspora Union, watching from Amsterdam, Holland. Great show, watching on YouTube. Asampahini says, good evening, watching from Achim Himan in the Eastern region. Kindly ask Professor Bauer if she has ambitions to go into politics because she is very good and beautiful. Well, I would ask her when she comes back. Oh, Almighty Tofik says, good evening, Dr. Kwan. Tofik, very good evening to you. I hope you are doing well in Mönchengladbach. Frema Oye says, wow, a very good program, watching from Mantineahu. Sakwa family, oh, the younger generation are very smart and intelligent. Watching on YouTube from Jimaponia Koforidua. Samuel Elijah Boatin says, intentionality is key to seal the gap of leadership crisis. Wow. Yeah, it is good. Definitely, it's a target and we'll put it in there. Patience Daku says, good evening, watching from Hamburg, Germany. Patience, we're grateful. Bob Kemping says what? Good evening, Dr. Jerome and your team. I must congratulate you for a good show this evening. Watching from Paris, France. Professor Bauer, very beautiful. Can I get her number? Bob, don't worry. I will ask her. Nanata from Mutatale. Please, how often does Professor Bauer comes to Ghana? She should organize a leadership program for the youth in the north. Greetings from Tatali Northern Region and Sakina Information Center listeners. We are grateful, Nana. I will ask her. Kwesi Insian says, we really need a part 2 of this show. I can't stop thinking and listening to the smart young chaps watching from Anglo Town in Koforidua. Lady Mal says, greetings, watching on Switch from St. Petersburg, Russia. Bravo, our able young people from Africa. Tafik says, how can we, the youth, get in touch with the older ones so that they can have this truth in us? Tafik Mönchengladbach. Okay, we would find out. Ghana in Fear, wonderful show, watching from Bosunsun in the Fantiakwa South District. Nana Yaubio says, good evening. Good evening. Though we are under curfew at Nkwanta, we are listening loud and clear on Adelema Community Information Center at Tutupen and Kechibi. We are grateful and we pray that peace will return to Nkwanta very soon. Noah Odo says, I'm watching from Oti region. The youth are grateful to your team. We are grateful as well that you're part of it. And Vivian says, good afternoon, watching from Toronto. Great program. Vivian, we are grateful that you have joined us all the way from Toronto in Canada. So wherever you are, it has been a wonderful show, and we are discussing the importance of the youth in leadership positions. And then I will switch and bring Ambassador Kwam, and then we want to see if, from his experience, are there any inspiring story of a young leader making a difference in Africa that other youth should have a look at or look to as an inspiration? It seems your mic is muted, and Ambassador Kwam. Yeah, great.
Yeah, say again. I didn't get you clearly.
We're asking whether you can have an inspiring story of any young leader so that other youth can look up to that person as an inspiration.
Oh, yeah, I mean, if you look at the insurgence of great learning and maximum exposure within the media spectrum and all. We see a lot of young people that are really doing well for themselves. And I do not want to mention a lot, but we see clearly young people building whole ecosystem from scratch. And I mean, living it up all the way to the top, even to the tune of no involvement of any elderly person and all. It really comes back to inform us how these young talents can really pull up a lot of strings, especially within their limited. If we look at the current dispensation of our government appointment, we are seeing a lot of young people being asked to lead, and we are seeing a lot of newness. We've seen new waves, new ideas, and energy coming, all of that. So I think it's something that we, the young people, must be encouraged and look at, even to be able to drive more change within our community. And let me hasten to add that, you see, you do not have to be in leadership position even before you start leading. The whole idea is you need to lead from where you are. And the first point of leadership is leading yourself. When I'm able to lead myself, leading others becomes an easy drive. All right. And this is where I think most of our teachings and most of our training centers on. We're talking about babies with sharp teeth and all of that coming up is because of what the society or the social cultural construct has made them. One of our profound saying is, people do what people see. As people begin to do what they see going on, that is what is really happening all over the place. Because if you don't see elders fighting themselves in parliament, if we don't see leaders even on the airwaves throwing tantrums and insulting themselves, it will not give any young person the moral right, or maybe the intellectual right, to stand and dish out certain kind of words to people who are grown. So it's something that the young people that leverages to be able to do it. With outstanding, I'd like to quickly also shoot down some ones. I believe strongly, no matter how wrong the older people are, there is a constructive way that we can definitely push our voice and our points to make meaning, in other than trying to use some kind of words that literally muddies the whole water. The whole thing is this: we should bear in mind that even the younger ones are also watching, and it can even be a much more dreary future if we don't really deal with this. So, I mean, Jerome, there are so many examples all over the place that we can really take inspiration from. And I want to challenge any young person listening that leadership starts from them. They should begin from them. And from that place, we'll be able to move outside of ourselves and even in our communities. Thank you.
But from your work that you have been doing, how have you led initiatives influence probably policy changes or community development?
Right. I can really say a lot of things to that, because for these years that we've been driving this change, we're seeing a lot of initiatives that are springing up. I mean, young people that were not bold or courageous, we see them really coming up and using the airwaves to be able to make great changes. And we can see that happening in the University of Cape Coast, in the Cape Coast Technical University, even in Legon, where we see a lot of young people trying to gather a lot of momentum to be able to set the record straight. One of the struggles that we also find even in this country is when leaders try to belittle the intelligence, the knowledge, and the strength of the young people, and by trying to use their superiority and resources again to, let's say, molest, or if not molest, possibly try to usurp their privileges of these young people. And yet we're seeing that through this training and through this leadership building, a lot of young people are becoming more bold, more courageous, and more outspoken. And we are seeing this thing really trickling down within the records of history. And that we are really thankful and excited about.
That is great. So, in that sense, since you said since you have been trying to drive a change,
Mhm.
one may be interested in finding out what industries or sectors need
Mhm.
more youth representation in leadership.
Yeah, definitely. We need. I think there's a lot of changes going on. I must really commend the current regime of leaders that are already in leadership position, and I'm feeling that there is a sort of pressure, which is may not be very physical, but it is something that is coming so strong. Just as the gender equalities thing started pushing up, where we're seeing a representation of female gender within the overall leadership spectrum, we are seeing a gradual push, and I must really say that it's come to stay, where every organization is pushing for diversity representation of the various generation all over the place. And so one of the key places that I really believe that there must be maximum youth representation actually has to do within our political space. All right. We really need to have intentionally, and we need to do it timely, because it seems like most of our leaders at that top are stuck within a certain kind of age range. And can you even imagine where we begin to use age as, should I say, a standard by which is wise, young, this is not wise, no experience, this and that. You're talking about experience. Have the system built enough experience to help the young person to be able to understand exactly what it means to lead? What it means to, I mean, even let's take a lot of inspiration from history. We are seeing 7 years, 12 years, 15 years leading a whole system and a whole country. How did this happen? Because the system was properly established and foundationed, and it already set the rules from the beginning. And so within the political space, I really want to have a lot of youth or young representation, because in Africa, it seems that is one of the major areas that we can drive a lot of policy change. And I like to leave it here. Thank you.
Wonderful, wonderful. Yeah, I mean, Professor Bawa is smiling, and I'm sure she's going to make a good contribution as well. Um, Honestly, my producer, I think we have made a very big mistake, because the combination and the time duration is not good. We will have to separate them and bring them different. But until we separate them, let me bring Prof in here. What role, because Ambassador was talking about the political landscape, what role do you think the youth leaders might play in shaping policy and governance?
Well, I mean, an enormous role, right? Enormous. Because if we're talking about experience, we are talking about the fact that no matter what, people lead because and from experience and from their various personal and life's experiences. And this is one of the reasons, and I'm very glad that Ambassador Kwam talked about it, is that diversity is important in leadership as well. People must see themselves reflected in the group that is leading them in order for them to be able to actually contribute, to support, and to hold them accountable. And in talking about leadership, again, and I'm glad that, Kwam brought this up as well, is that we also look at the diversity even of our political representation at this moment, which is severely lacking. This particular government is trying hard, but let's not forget that even in the Nkrumah era, we had lots more women represented in, high offices in our country, which is why, for instance, it was a bit of a shame that Ghana took so long to finally get the affirmative action bill in place. Now, the point is that we have to begin to diversify who we consider to be leaders, who are holding political leaders. We should be able to go to a ministry and see a young woman with her baby as the minister of, one of the ministries, because that is part and parcel of our lives. We know that, we need children in the future. You need a labor force in the first place. If you're thinking about Ghana 20 years, 30 years from now, you are going to need biological representation. And many of us, when you asked, who inspires you as leaders, I could think of so many people, but those people are not the people you see on TV. They are not the ones you necessarily see on TikTok. There are people like my mother, right? who literally could produce water from a rock. And many of us saw this. Many of us saw our mothers leading with very little resources in our various homes. We saw how industrious they were. We still see how industrious they are in terms of, how they are able to mobilize resources and how wise they are actually, even in sometimes, dealing with very oppressive situations. Right. So when we talk about leadership, sometimes, of course, it's what we see on TV, it's the people who are represented at those top levels. And for many of us, and when you talk to some of these politicians, some of them will tell you that it was their mothers who inspired them, who encouraged them, who told them that they could become somebody important in future. But what is problematic is that we get there and the public sphere as we have it now, then increasingly begins to look like we only have men in Ghana, right? Or men in Africa, or for that matter, men in the world. And sometimes, we sometimes let's just apply a little bit of logic to this particular situation. Think about it. If we've had only one dominant group of people leading us all this while, and we are still crying, we are still poor, no hospitals, oxygen, all of those things, perhaps, just perhaps, we may want to try a different way, right? We may try to think about what else could we do. Our people from Upper West say that Hinambora Kwong say into Kola Sore, right?
That's
But
right.
if you're looking for water to drink, you find a way to the well. We are in a crisis situation. We are in crisis mode. So we have to think, what have we been doing all this while that hasn't worked? Again, take the analogy of a baby crying. You start to feed the baby, it's still crying. You start to do this, it's still crying. And then you realize, oh, the baby is probably just too warm. So you start to fan it, right? So we have to also be able to look at those kinds of problems. So when we look at leadership, the idea of diversity, that is including youth in leadership, also extends to gender diversity. You cannot have half of your population being women and pretending that those women do not have the brains nor the imagination. If we are talking actually about creative imagination, maybe I may be biased, but God bless us. If we do not think that women, you go to the market, just go to the market for inspiration, right? Like as an example, walk through Makola Market if you are in Accra, walk to Wa Market, Tamale Market if you are in Tamale, and see how people move with very little resources for them. Now, that's a creative imagination that we could harness, not just as a country, but as as a continent. And I think that's one of the problems with that, right? And this is why people are pushing for youth leadership, because you have young people who are not afraid to experiment, who have creative civic imaginations. And in part because they are still fairly young, they know that they are going to live long enough that whatever mistakes they are making now will catch up on them. Right? I mean, and we also have to think about the fact that some of the older leaders of the world, and I'm not restricting us to Ghana or Africa for that matter, probably do not care as much, right? Why don't we think so? They do not care as much because their time on this planet is limited. I'm just asking us to think. I'm not saying they don't care. There are lots and lots of really caring older people who are, again, as I've said, interested in guiding us. But that's the point, right? We have to be able to combine these things. And when we talk about youth in leadership, that doesn't mean that we don't want to see older people in leadership. Diversity, in terms of the age range, in terms of gender, also in terms of even abilities. Because sometimes when we talk about diversity, people just, it's gender and all of that. We don't normally see people who have physical disabilities in leadership positions. And all of these kinds of perspectives help to broaden our imagination and help to make and shape our society. If I am a leader, if I'm in a position of power, maybe not necessarily as a leader, but if I'm in a position of power, and I'm working at the ministry, and I find out that all of these women who have to bring their children to work have to struggle in terms of childcare and all of that, I'm likely going to solve the childcare problem. I'm likely going to make sure that the education system is working well enough that when they come home, I don't have to spend too much time doing homework with them. And that's because I am at this stage where I'm still taking care of children. If I am someone with a physical disability, I'm going to make sure that when we are constructing roads in our country, that we ensure that there are ramps and there are places where people who are physically disabled can also access the resources of our country. And that makes us automatically a much better society because we are including everyone, and that way people are not disenfranchised, right? And so when you're able to think broadly, and I think that's one of the things that we have to bring back into, discussions of Africa, that we must always think not just about yourself and your selfish needs, because those things are important, but you are not the most important thing on earth.
Yeah.
And you think about the fact that if with all of the wealth that you have, if you're walking on the street and you collapsed, you cannot take yourself to a hospital. You cannot on your own help yourself. And if you also think a little further, that there's going to be a time, and I think that I can't say it best, that you help me, because I haven't spoken tree for a while. I'm not going to attempt it here. That we help your teeth to grow, and then you help ours to fall out. So you know that there's going to be a time of your life when you're going to depend on younger people to help you. You're going to basically be dependent on them. So when you're thinking in that sense of inclusivity and thinking of creating a world that is better, you are going to be the beneficiary, right? And all of the studies, everything shows that if our country is prosperous, if we think about the poorest of the poor, and we know that these people, if they have the resources, not only are they going to increase the prosperity for the country, but in the end, they are going to make your life better. So that when you build your house with all of the money that you've earned from your hard work, you don't have to put up high walls and then security fence, and then you have to hire. Nobody even sees how beautiful your house is. You have to hide it because of insecurity, in part because the resources are not fairly distributed. Right? So there's a lot. I could go on and on, but I think we don't need to go too far to pull on examples of proper leadership. We all see it. We all know those people in our villages, in our communities, in our circles who say, good job, you're doing a good job. Keep it up. My son, you're going to school. My daughter, keep it up. Keep doing the right thing. We know the kose seller who sometimes give you kose for free because they've seen you hungry. And maybe today, that's leadership. Those are the sorts of humane leadership qualities we want to reclaim, right? So when we talk about leadership, we have to demystify it so that when we see John Mahama and we see Professor Jane Opoku Ajiman there, we have to be able to look at them as humans who are occupying very important roles, of course, whose decision-making is going to impact our lives.
Nice.
But these people were once children, right? They were once babies. They were once helpless at some point. They are human beings, right? And we should be able to go and say, hey, Professor Nana, you see, your government is doing this, but could you think about doing something else, right? Hey, John Mahama, fantastic job you're doing on this particular platform. But what about these people in these villages who still don't have drinking water while your ministers are still driving around in V8s? No disrespect. Ministers should have V8s. God bless them, right? But why should you have a V8 when people in your constituency still do not have water to drink? No, there's something that is not right about that kind of a disparity, because that is what leads to the discontentment. That is what is leading to the ability of terrorists and extremist groups to recruit young people. Because when people are discontent and they are seeing these wide disparities in the wealth in the country, then they are very easily disenfranchised. And when people feel like they have nothing to lose, then we are all the worse off for it. Right. So it's very important for us to weigh these sorts of things, right? There is enough resources in that country for us to not, in this particular case, and we don't need to depend on the US aid. God bless us. We have enough to be able to say, at least everyone deserves clean drinking water. That women who are having children should not have to be lying on bare floors in our maternity units, when in fact the whole point of our country is that we keep having children so that the children that are the future leaders can actually have. Why could we not have oxygen in our hospitals? That's not something that I think where we need to depend on some external resource, some NGOs here and there, to come and solve some of those problems. So I think for us, when we are talking about youth in leadership, I think we also have to think about diversity in that leadership, in the visual representation of that leadership, but also in terms of the needs. Right? What is it that we are trying to solve? What does leadership do? Leadership solves. crisis and problems for us. Thank you.
I think time is not our friend, and that is exactly why a lot of people are getting a bit disappointed. But somebody has asked me to let you answer certain questions that were directed at you.
Okay.
The first question was that kindly ask Professor Bauer if she has ambitions of going into politics.
That's a very good question. That's a very good question. I think there are so many people in Ghana, so many young women in Upper West region that I know, so many people in Accra, so many people in different spaces across the country that have political ambitions. So you don't have to wait for me to have those ambitions or to declare them and all of that. At the moment, I enjoy the work that I do in supporting local organizers, activists, especially those people who push the diversity bill, because I think that we've seen progress, as far as those things are concerned. So if you're talking about what my ambitions are to support people who actually want to do important things, right? Because we also have to have the people in the background helping, right? The people who are, pushing people forward. Again, there's an Akan proverb, and again, I'm not going to say it in tree, that if you're climbing a good tree, we help you to climb the tree, right? So I'm one of those people helping people to climb the tree, right? Because we do have to encourage people. And there are so many, when you think about opportunities, which is one of the other things that Kwam talked about, creating intentional opportunities. You are hearing me talk, but I know that you even on your own, people who have similar, even more brilliant ideas, I have to say. Right, but where's the opportunity to hear all of those kinds of people? But that's my facetious way of answering your question at this point. And thank you for the vote of confidence.
Well, Lisa, where you have landed now has opened another avenue for us, because someone also asked a question if you could organize how often the professor comes to Ghana. He should organize a leadership program for the youth in the north. It is something that today's Ghana News team, we have been thinking about it, trying to organize a conference where we have at least 3-4 seasoned people to share, especially within our youth age brackets, to share experience with people who want to learn. And by that, your presence and your presentation would inspire somebody and change the person's life and way of thinking. And at the end of the day, Ghana and Africa will be beneficiary from such knowledge. So definitely the ball is in your court. But on this program, we will have to get you back by my producer on part 2. That this time round, only you and Ambassador come separately, so that
Yeah.
we can have time to have a very good digestion on most of these topics. But before I let you go, there are two of you. Let me start with Professor Bauer. What advice would you give to young people who appears or who aspire to leadership roles but face systematic barriers?
I would say keep digging, keep looking, keep fighting, and look for community. How do you look for community? Look for other people that are similar to you. There are so many programs, including some of what Kwam is talking about. There are so many little programs here and there that actually will help to support. There are so many of these things. So some of it is where to find the knowledge. So I know that those barriers seem daunting, but it is the same thing. The Chinese people say that if a journey of 1,000 steps starts with just the first step. So the first thing you can do is advertise your problem, right? I want to do this and I'm looking for support. And these days, for people who have internet, just tell people, I want to do this. And before you realize, people are able to connect you. You can be on TikTok and you can say it, even on TikTok. And I've seen those kinds of things happening. And someone else reaches out to say, hey, there is this person who has these ambitions or who wants to do this. Part of the problem sometimes is that we also have people who are shy to come forward because of these kinds of systemic challenges, particularly for young women, right? Because sometimes the backlash is personal and it is so detrimental to their own self-esteem. So if you are one of these people and you are looking for support, hey, I think you have, maybe you have my contact address, or you can even contact this program. And maybe one of the things, I always throw things back to media or people who invite me to things, maybe you can start a database of people who want to do this and are facing challenges, and then they can indicate what kinds of challenges they are facing, and we can crowdsource solutions for these things. So that's my one advice, or that's the first piece of advice I'll give. The last one is one that I am borrowing from Weyala. And Weyala is a fantastic international musician whose music, on the days that I'm feeling really, low or pessimistic about the state of the world, I just listen. And one of the tunes that I like from her is Tinamba Yi Tinamba Wa Tinamba Seuche Bankono. And that, if I'm translating properly, is that we've not yet even emerged, right? So as young leaders, as young women, as young people with disabilities who have ambitions to lead this country, to lead this world, remember that you are just budding, and don't let anyone kill that shine. Anyone else who's made it wherever they've made it, irrespective of has done so sometimes irrespective of certain types of challenges. But I definitely understand about the challenges. So what I'm going to say is, do not give up. Advertise your problem, and we sometimes we're able to find solutions by just telling people that this is what you want to do. I think I'm going to end it here for the sake of time.
So that has been the passing words of Professor Sylvia Bauer. Now I'll bring in Ambassador Kwam, and then we see for his words before we can now draw our curtains down. Ambassador Kwam, are you please available? Oh, I think we're having a challenge with him. Because I wanted him to tell us his closing words, looking at what he could tell those who doubt the capabilities of young leaders. But if he's not available, we would say thank you to all of you for being part of the show today. And it's a promise. My producer has accepted. We're going to have these two guests, but this time separately, and we'll look at other issues which will serve as a motivation to we the younger ones who want to go into leadership and who want to take responsibility. You must not necessarily be in the leadership position, but once you take responsibility upon yourself and analyzing the situation and knowing what you have to do to contribute to the growth of Ghana and Africa and yourself, your community, it is key. And we would do it once again. So until we come your way next week at the same time on the same program, greetings to you all on behalf of my producer, Seth Ade, to all of you up there on today's Ghana News Network. We are grateful. Take good care of yourself, and Yehovah bless all of us. Good night.
The country where I come from, the truth is an irony.